interest, then you're good to go.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. I think most people know you, Kieng, but for those who don't, you just want to give us a little quick introduction about yourself?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So my name's King. In-game name is King Ivy, and I play out of Toronto, Ontario. And I'm a PvP enthusiast, and I also have a channel where I post. Part of my channel is at least incorporates posting PvP battles, some advanced strategies, and just live streaming PvP. And I just really enjoy it. So I'm happy to be here.
Sounds like you're PvPing while talking.
No, that's just I'm watching my friend's dog, so I have to place my shoes up higher, and then one of them just fell. So that would be cool tapping strategies if I could just have things drop onto my phone and hit 3 rings.
So, did you get into PvP like day one it dropped?
So that's an interesting question. So before PvP dropped, I actually didn't think I was going to get into it too much. Because like I'm more about a community building guy. I'm not. And then when it dropped, I was like, okay, this is a cool mechanic. I'll play it here and there. And then I didn't really get into it probably till after my first beta tournament in December. And I won that tournament. And I was like, oh, this is pretty fun. I really enjoy this tournament environment. And then because I won that, and I posted on Twitter, like a bunch of people were asking me questions about PvP. I'm like, oh, I don't really know too much. I love helping people, so I started doing a little more research and practicing more. Then on from there. How about for you guys?
Yeah, I was also pretty skeptical of it at first because I wasn't expecting Niantic to implement it very well, and so I had low expectations. And so when PvP first came out, I was like, oh, this is stupid. And then as I started playing a little more, I realized it was actually pretty fun, and the skill aspect really appealed to me because for raids, for the most part, I mean, a lot of the skill is in the preparation, like knowing what mons to use. But once it comes to the raids, it's a little bit of just tap, tap, tap. Obviously, there is some skill involved, which is evidenced by some of the crazy raid records you've gotten. But I definitely like the higher skill aspect to PvP.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's jump into the Nightmare meta. So first, I kind of wanted to cover the fighting types. So which of the fighting types kind of stand out to you?
For me, I prefer Toxicrow, and I'll talk about one of my strategies I like to use for my teams of 3, which I'll talk about now. Then people counter it when I go to my tournament, but I'll talk about it later on. But I prefer Toxicrow for mostly because it beats its fellow fighting compatriots.
Yeah, I agree. That's pretty important. If you had to pick a second fighting type, what's kind of your second choice?
I prefer Poliwrath with Mudshot Power Up Punch. And that's one. I'm not a huge fan of Lucario. I know Lucario has a lot of outside of fighting its other fighting compatriots. Like obviously, its Steel typing's really useful against other psychic Pokemon and poison moves. But I just find like just because of the rock paper scissors component of it, or at least a lot of people bring fighting psychic dark, you end up like lining up those Pokemon. Obviously, you can play around with that, but I prefer Poliwrath as my second fighting Pokemon.
And what other charge move are you running on it then?
I'm running Ice Punch right now, but I am contemplating. I prefer Ice Punch mostly for, but I am considering or but right now I'm running Ice Punch and it seems to be okay for me.
And you like Mudshot over Bubble? Because I know there's some trade-offs there.
There's certainly a lot of trade-offs, but I right now I prefer Mudshot over Bubble. I just prefer the ability to get to charge moves quickly, and then being able to play with your opponent in that manner. But I know there's a lot of utility in Bubble as well.
Okay. And does anyone else want to add anything any thoughts about the fighting group?
Well, I've done a bit of testing myself with Heracross, and in our post that we put up a couple days ago, people were commenting about why Heracross really should is running close combat instead of Earthquake. But
Actually, on my stream on Monday, I had people like vote whether I should power up and charge move or Heracross, and then Heracross ended up winning. And there was like some pretty interesting uses, especially with Mega Horn.
yeah,
It can, if you hit a psychic user with Mega Horn, it's gonna do a lot of damage. And it's like what I call like these like comeback strategies. Able to land this particular charge move, then it can really turn the tables of a match.
right. I'm just going to save you 50,000 dust though, and say you don't need anything aside from Megahorn.
Okay. Well, I have lots of Stardust, so
No, I
yeah,
know. I'm just saying in case you wanted to have that one discount pick, so to speak.
yeah, no, absolutely. I could see that. That's good to
Anyone
know.
else want? Anyone else want to add anything on the fighting types?
Stardust comment.
Not me personally, but looking at the Twitch chat, somebody wants to know your opinion, Kieng, on Hitmonchan. And if you'd run one, what would you use?
So this is a good question because I've been, um, yeah, because I've been posting on Twitter asking for people for their regional lineups as well, and I was just running him on Chan for testing someone's regional lineup. But him on Chan, uh, similar moves like in terms of counter and power up punch as Lucario. Obviously it has a range of elemental punches, which could be useful. I haven't tried him. I have a him on Chan, but I haven't tried too much in Nightmare. I presume Ice Punch or Thunder Punch would probably have the most utility.
Yeah, I would think Ice Punch because Ice Punch gives you super effective against Shift Tree and Zatu.
Or Thunder Punch gives you super effective against Poliwrath and Zatu, so it's really whichever one you want to counter aside from Zatu.
Right, but for Poliwrath, you can still hit it for neutral with Power Punch. I guess you can also hit Shift Tree for neutral with Power Punch too.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a wash.
Shift Tree would be super effective with Power Punch.
Yeah, it'd be super effective.
Yeah.
Probably would want to do power up punch to. It depends on how late game you are with against Shift Tree and how much.
Hitmonchan just seems like a step below the Toxicroak, Poliwrath, and Lucario to me, just based on the sims I've looked at.
I found it to be very squishy. Yeah.
All right, and then kind of switching gears then, of the Confusion users, which do you like any of them, or what's your preference within the Confusion block?
I prefer, and maybe I'm like too biased towards legacy movesets, but I prefer Hypno, Shadow Ball, and Focus Blast. Just because I've ended up in a lot of closing game situations where I'm up against or like Drapion, and then I'm able to, because I have a slight energy advantage going into the matchup, that I'm able to hit Focus Blast and deal with those counters.
The interesting thing is though is that a Focus Blast won't even kill an Umbreon.
Yeah. Well, Umbreon is probably the tankiest dark Pokemon in the meta. I'm mistaken.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It does like if I recall correctly, it probably does like 80 to 70 to 80% on on Drapion and Skunk Tank, Alone Muck, and then because Confusion is like only single resisted by those dark poisons. At least I haven't encountered Umbreon with Focus Blast, and it's only taken out only about half. So certainly, yeah.
Have you tried Bronzong? Because I don't know. Based on the Sims I've looked at so far, Bronzong seems more appealing to me than Hypno, and it can beat Skuntank regardless, one shield or no shields.
I certainly like Bronzon as well. And to be honest, if I didn't have Shadow Ball Hypno, that's what I recommend to people. Just because it also does really well against other psychic Pokemon, which would I value, at least right now in the early meta. I value that a lot, the ability to beat type. So I like Bronzon a lot as well. Some interesting matches against somebody that was using a Mr. Mime, which I find really interesting. I think it's the only Confusion user that beats Toxicroak before it can do a charge move.
Huh.
So,
what about Gardevoir?
Maybe Gardevoir as well.
Gardevoir and Gallade can both take out Tox in 3 Confusions.
Oh, wow, okay.
As well as Mr. Mime.
Actually, everything takes out Toxicroak with Confusion only. Hypno's the longest at 4, but every Confusion user kills Toxicroak before it can actually get off a Mud Bomb.
It's not necessarily about killing Toxicroak quickly. I mean, taking 4 Confusions, you get a little bit of extra energy gain as well. It's not like Toxicroak's really going to hurt you with the Mud Bomb or Sludge Bomb.
Yeah, I guess if you're a Bronzon, you're probably a little bit more concerned. Yeah, you're probably a little bit more concerned about Mud Bomb then. Yeah, because I'm looking here, like Bronzon versus Toxicroak. Like Toxicroak's able to get to the Mud Bomb after 6 counters, which would be before the.
Yeah, same for Claydol.
Yeah, and then oftentimes, like, people are Toxicroak, like, a lot of these situations are not like at even energy or even situations. Sometimes like people are switching in, and I think being able to kill it under one. Not that I'm advocating Mr. Mime, just or Galena or Carter Prime, just stating an interesting point of view, because a lot of times people do end up hitting sludge bomb. At least I find in practice in a lot of videos that I've seen, people end up getting to a sludge bomb, like a sludge bomb or mud bomb, depending on what psychic Pokemon you're going against, which can do a considerable amount of damage.
And then back to Bronzong, I think one thing that stands out for me for Bronzong compared to Hypno is I believe Bronzong has a better matchup against Xatu, which I think is pretty important given how popular Xatu seems like it's going to be.
No, I agree with that as well. Or I guess, what's the main, if you were to, what would be the advantage of running a Hypno over Bronzong, since there seems to be quite a few advantages of running Bronzong, if any?
The option of Focus Blast that Hypno has, and the uncertainty of whether it has Psyshock or Shadow Ball. As opposed to Bronzong, you only have Double Steel, which is what it's good at, but it's at the same time, it's predictable, so you don't have that factor working for you. How
does Hypno do against Alolan Raichu? Does anyone know? I don't remember that one off the top of my head, because I know Alolan Raichu beats Bronzong, so maybe if Hypno has a better Alolan Raichu matchup, that could be something in its favor.
I can pull it up right now.
Raichu destroys.
Raichu wins. So Raichu wins in no shield. Raichu wins in shield situations, but Hypno wins in no shield, where Bronzong loses even in no shields.
Okay, so that's one advantage because I'm assuming that Hypno would also be able to win shields up potentially with an energy advantage, whereas all of Bronzong's charge moves are resisted by Raichu, so that kind of gets walled.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Makes sense.
Does
Yeah,
anyone
no,
else have it? Or go on.
That is a good point though. Hypno, if it's just from evens in one shield, Hypno loses, but it's got a charge like ready to go. So if Raichu is subbed in, then I think Hypno would probably win that.
Okay, so it seems like within a psychic subtype, Bronzong has the better Xatu matchup, while Hypno has the better Alolan Raichu matchup.
yeah, I don't think you can have Psyshock in there.
And then I guess we can expand this now to the greater psychic field. Which psychic picks are you liking in general?
Whatever pair for my confusion user, I prefer Zatu. Right now, I have seen a lot of people use Alolan Raichu. It's been a really popular pick. I haven't had too much practice with Alolan Raichu, but right now I prefer over Alolan Raichu and Claydol as we have listed here.
And why is that? Why do you like it better?
I like the ability to hit these dark poison. Well, I guess with in terms of air slash and air lace. Hit with neutral damage. I guess Lone Raichu has a as well. And then be the main reason, and as well against Toxicroak, be able to switch in, because I like to switch in and burn someone's, not burns, like waste their charge move on an inferior typing matchup.
Right. Yeah,
Like
that's
if
a
you can
good
catch the
strategy.
Mud Bomb with Zatu
Yeah, exactly. So like I obviously discount the moves and switch in.
and then switch in, yeah.
Yeah, that way they waste their energy, especially with people love to spam their charge moves.
Mm-hmm.
And like even when they switch in, they can't even control themselves and do the mud bomb anyways. That's at least one thing. That's a one strategy I like to do a lot, especially when I have a inferior lead against my opponent.
So Mason, I know you've used Alolan Raichu quite a bit. So what are your thoughts on it?
Alolan Raichu is good, especially with an energy advantage and shields down. It can run away with the game, but I mean, most Pokemon can do that. It just seems that he does it better than everybody else. It's tricky to, yeah, I mean, you really got to use, as cheap as he is, it's nice that he's quite affordable, but you really need to practice a lot with him to learn when to Thunder Punch and when to go for the Wild Charge. And then he's just not as consistent as I would like, per se, because a lot of his one shield matchups do rely on him shield baiting. I've actually just found him more irritating than anything, and I've ended up running Claydol just to counter Alolan Raichu.
So then,
Yeah,
which
then
psychic, Mason? Which psychic types are you liking the best then?
I'm still dancing around like the top four. I haven't been able to make a decision yet. The only one that I'm really sold on is Zatu. And then because I like Zatu so much, I'll usually end up running Claydol with it so that I have a positive Alolan Raichu matchup.
That makes sense. AJ, what were you gonna say?
Sorry, I'm in the middle of the chat. I was just gonna say that Alolan Raichu. I've been on the receiving end of using Alolan Raichu against Claydol, or it's actually there's teams that exist that are perfectly balanced, except that Claydol can run through almost all of them. So, specifically Claydol, you want to be prepared for it as a threat, not necessarily you have to bring it in a team. But if you're not ready for it, you could be in a really, really tough spot.
Yeah,
Like
because
if you were to
Claydol.
bring,
Go on.
like if you were to bring Toxicroak and Alolan Raichu against a Claydol team,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
you'd really have to make sure that you played it right, because if you miss with your Dark type, then you're toast.
Yeah, and Claydol also has that late game nuke ability with Earthquake. That makes it pretty interesting. Because it does function really well as a closer, but because it walls Alolan Raichu and has that confusion for like Toxicroak, you can also use it in that early to mid game if you line it up against the right things, which I think makes it a little more flexible than some of the closers we've seen in previous cups.
Yeah, like one team that I was running a lot just as a scrimmage practice was Alolan Raichu, Toxicroak, and Alolan Raticate. Alolan Raticate can beat Claydol just fine, but definitely can't take an Earthquake well. Uh, for that matter, almost nothing can take an Earthquake well. Xatu is just about the only thing. So if you don't match specifically your dedicated counter to Claydol, you could be in a lot of trouble, especially late game.
Anyone else have anything to add? Is there any more questions on the Twitch chat, or are
Not
we
for
good to move
Claydol,
on?
but
I do have
I
a
do have
question.
one Psychic type.
When you use Clado or if you play against Clado, do you see more as a switch in or ever as a lead, or is that just dependent on the other team's composition?
I haven't seen it that much as a lead. I've seen it more as a response to a switch. So like if I'm in a bad lead, I'm switching something in, and then Claydol can totally wall it. That being said, I haven't really done best of 3 declared 6 yet, so I'm sure that would change. I'm not so sure I would be switching something in, knowing that they had a Claydol. But there it is. It is something to consider because it can just totally wall some things.
He's
Very
not
popular.
he's not strictly a closer, because I mean, as a Psychic type, his main role, and as a Confusion user, his main role is to counter Toxicroak. And then I feel like the late game sweep is just a bonus with him. So I feel that you'll typically see him more towards the end of matches, but he's certainly, don't rule it out as an opener, especially if you're trying to catch a Toxicroak with it.
Or a Raichu.
Right.
So, anything else on the psychic types in general that anyone wants to touch on?
Yeah, I haven't encountered I haven't faced a lot of Claydols. Maybe like twice. But I think I'm just running some sims on my own here. I think Claydol has maybe a harder matchup against fighting Pokemon, other Confusion users, because of its ground typing. So like against Poliwrath, it's a closer matchup than it is against Hypno or maybe not. Yeah, maybe not Bronzong. Actually, I haven't ran that one yet.
Cool.
Cardio as well.
Yeah.
He gets Bronzong shields down.
Yeah. If it can get an Earthquake, it's game over for Bronzong. But depending on the shield situations, it can go kind of even, or one of them went very low HP.
And without getting too much into the team composition, I will say I've found it hard to sort of work Claydol into a 2 psychic lineup, whereas like Claydol, it really sort of fits best in a 3 psychic lineup because of the Xatu Claydol matchup. Like if you bring Xatu and Claydol together, that leaves you open to Poliwrath, and if you bring a Raichu and Claydol together, then that leaves you open to Shiftry. In terms of your psychics, just getting walled hard. So
Interesting. And that's something we can touch on a little more later.
There's just one more I wanted to bring up a bit. I've personally had quite a bit of success with Slowbro running Ice Beam and Water Pulse, but with actually Water Gun instead of Confusion for neutral chip damage instead of harder super effective damage. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that as well, Kieng.
I have, people been suggesting Slowbro. It's on my list to test out, but I actually did not think about running a water gun matchups play out in the meta with water gun versus confusion.
So what were you using it to like counter then? Beagle.
Well, you can ask Mason. We did a couple of scrims last night with it. Basically, I'd bring it in against his Xatu or even Toxicroak, and I'd just chip it away with a water gun, and then by the time I get a charge move off, one of us would either switch out, or I can actually nearly get 2 ice beams off, and then actually kill an Xatu with 1 shield. It's just, I don't know, something off meta that I felt like testing. Anyways, I had.
Yeah.
It's hard to justify a psychic type that doesn't do very well versus fighting types.
It's kind of like a one-shot trick. Once you use it, you've lost that element of surprise, and you've sort of used that slot up on something that doesn't deliver as much damage as some of the other options on the table. I did have a comment.
Shield.
I did have a comment about Claydol that just came up on the Twitch and the live stream chat, which is about the debate between extrasensory and confusion. I know we've heavily leaned towards confusion just because of its high damage output, but extrasensory does charge a little bit faster. So if you guys have any experience with extrasensory, leave that open.
Extrasensory means it can beat Bronzong without baiting.
Interesting.
An interesting point.
And there's still no way that Toxicroak could take.
No, still beats Toxicroak.
Yeah.
How about its matchups against like Polyrath? Does it need confusion for that one?
Ooh.
So I'm simming it against the concentrated meta right now, and yeah, you do pick up the Polyrath win and 1 shield, which you lose in 1 shield with extra.
But do you win anything? What matchups do you gain with extrasensory?
Bronzong.
Bronzong, 1 shield.
Assume it would beat Lucario better. Actually, don't know about that one. Because right now it kind of goes even with Lucario depending on baits. Lucario can get a Shadow Ball in. But maybe if it charged Earthquake quick.
So, extrasensory, Claydol loses all matchups because Lucario gets Power Up Punch and then Shadow Ball before it gets off 2 Gyro Balls.
Yeah.
Versus or Confusion where Claydol can actually win 2 shields and
So that seems like
wins.
Lucario has to shield bait though, right?
Yeah, it's relying on Lucario landing
Always.
the Shadow Ball.
No,
If Lucario-
it can just get 2 Shadow Balls off before Lucario before Claydol gets 2 Earthquakes though. So
Oh yeah,
just
no, I just
as long
said that.
as
You're
it's
absolutely
1
right.
shield.
Yeah. So Choose to Master was just bringing that up because it is hard to quantify this in Sims. Because it really does mean ultimately that you're just going to charge Earthquake faster. So it's a matter of how much you value Claydol's damage output more as a confusion user and its psychic damage or as the Earthquake nuke that it is. So it's definitely a toss-up.
Against
And
Lucario, using
No,
confusion, it's like that Bronzong matchup where you don't want to use a charge move as Claydol, but the best you can do 1 shield is tie. But it's better than losing, and you do burn a shield, but
Generally,
And
though.
in no shields against the concentrated meta, Extra Sensory does pick up a win against Shadow Ball Hypno. It's a really close win, but it was a really close loss with Confusion. And then it wins the head-to-head against a Confusion Claydol in no shield.
Okay, so it seems like they're pretty even, but there's like a couple little nuanced trade-offs.
Mm-hmm.
That's something worth looking into if someone decides to run Claydol.
And another question that came up, not related to Clay at all, was hopefully I'm pronouncing this right, is Chimek. Just people were asking about it, mainly because it's got like really pretty good moves. Anybody have experience with Chimeko?
I do not.
I guess it has good shield baiting with Psyshock.
Yeah. So that's whoever asked that question. I could look it up, but that would be your biggest advantage to Chimeko. I just asked in a group of people that dedicate a lot of time to PvP, and most of them are not familiar with the matchups. I mean, we could guess what it would be good at, what it would be good against, and what it wouldn't be. But Chimeko, in counterintuitive matchups, you might have the edge because I might not switch out, not knowing that it has a pretty positive matchup against something that I'm running. And maybe it's terrible, I don't know.
Yeah, I just remember kind of seeing from a glance that I didn't sim quite as well as some of the other psychic types. So I kind of ignored it, but you're right. That's something that's even if you're not running it, you might want to look at just so you're familiar with the matchups. All right,
And
so go ahead.
I was just going to add that it does lose the head-to-head with Bronzong. It trades with Claydol, and it loses to Hypno no shields, but beats Shadow Ball Hypno one shield. But the biggest thing is that it gets walled hard by Darks because of those charge moves. Because Darks will resist both the Ghost as well as the Psychic charge move.
Right, so it gets walled by Darks. I'm assuming it should beat all the psychics, and it seems like it's or I mean, it should beat all the fightings, and it seems like it's so against the psychics. So that
Right.
just doesn't seem quite good enough to me. In my opinion, if you're going to be walled by the Darks, you need to be having stellar matchups against the psychic types.
Just one thing about that actually with the fighting types, it doesn't beat all of them, it actually loses to Lucario at 1 or 2 shield with a shield bait. But it actually beats it no shield just because of Psyshock.
Yeah, because that seems like it's kind of trying to fill a similar role to like Spiritomb, because Spiritomb loses to all the dark types and gets walled by them, but Spiritomb has much better matchups against the psychic types. So it seems like kind of a worse version of that, just at initial glance. Would you guys agree, or what do you guys think?
It seems kind of like a psychic type version of Spiritomb where its moves are decent but not good enough to push it over the edge. Also,
All right,
Well, I
so I
guess
think this. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, just when I think about Spiritomb, I think about Spiritomb being able to being like the weakest psychic Pokemon, like barely like having okay matchups in fighting, then having really strong okay matchups against the fighting Pokemon, which is something that dark Pokemon typically, and then obviously beating the psychic Pokemon. I don't know if like it carries through with Chimecho, because that would assume that Chimecho can have a good matchup against its weakness, which is dark Pokemon. If I were to carry that analogy.
Right, but I was saying they're similar because they both get walled by dark types, and both are trying to have good matchups against fighting and psychic.
Okay, yeah.
Which I think that's kind of a good lead in. So let's kind of shift gears to the dark types. And while we're on the topic, what do you think about Spiritomb? Do you think it's worth running, or what's your experience with it?
So personally, I've been experimenting with this lineup, and there's a lot of novelty with this lineup. But leading with on or Skunk Tank, and then having Toxicroak. So hopefully having if I have a Dracon, for example, and they have a Skunk Tank, then and then having Toxicroak, which beats most of the other fighting Pokemon, and then having Spiritomb to have to give me flexibility if I end up losing the job. So I run like 2 darks in a fighting, and then using Spiritomb with its flexibility to win the matchup.
And what moveset are you running on that?
On Spiritomb,
Yeah.
was it like Sucker Punch, Ominous Wind, and Shadow Ball?
Okay, because I remember there is some debate over which fast move is better. So I was curious which one you were
Okay.
running.
Yeah, right now I'm running Sucker Punch. If I recall correctly, it has better energy generation than Feint Attack. Wrong?
That's enough to sell me on it.
I think Polymers, you looked into the Spiritomb fast move, right?
Yeah, so there are some trade-offs. So Sucker Punch is the faster energy gain move, and Feint Attack does a little more damage. There are a few trade-offs, but I guess the main takeaway is Sucker Punch picks up a couple wins, but those are shield bait dependent wins, and Feint Attack is able to solidify the wins against Zatu and Alolan Raichu without needing a shield bait, which is really big with just the Ominous Wind spam.
And how does it do it against Toxicroak still? Does it still wall it?
Toxicroak?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Feint Attack is still able to beat Toxicroak in 0 shields and 1 shield, but the 1 shield is really close. So it's one of those things where, if Toxicroak gets a few, counters in, it has, it's not like 1 counter of energy banked, but if it has a few counters banked of energy, then, that matchup could potentially flip.
And do you know which matchups those were that you can gain? You said they were shield bait dependent. Do you remember what those were?
Yes. It was Hitmonchan and Poliwrath, I believe, but I can double check real quick.
Okay, so it sounds like one is giving you better matchups with Alolan Raichu and Zatu, and the other is giving you better matchups against fighting types.
Right, but those are shield bait dependent, which is kind of the tricky thing. So it's not a guaranteed, like those 2 wins that you're picking up in 1 shield with Sucker Punch, they're not guaranteed. You'll have to bait the shield with the Ominous Wind and then hit them with the Shadow Ball.
Okay.
It looks like you need to come in with 3 counters to get off a 3rd Mud Bomb in the 1 shield matchup to win it. It's Toxicroak.
Right, so that's something where if you switch quickly, then they won't be able to have the energy advantage.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay. While Polymers is looking that up, let's kind of continue, and we can circle back to the Spiritomb. So for
I
you
have
have
it.
it.
Sorry. Yep. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So for Feint Attack, Spiritomb needs Shadow Ball for the mirror, Hitmonchan, and Toxicroak and no shields. Whereas with Sucker Punch, it can actually get a couple wins against Hitmonchan as well as Polygraph.
Okay. So that's another one where if you decide to run Spiritomb, you should definitely go back and look at the sims and see which coverage is more important to you. Because it seems like there's not one that's necessarily maybe universally better.
And while we're talking about Spiritomb, I think it's also important to point out maybe that the second move unlock is great if you can add it, but it can still beat Toxicroak with just Feint Attack, Ominous Wind, as well as Alolan Raichu. So if you're a little on the fence about doing that second move unlock, you could maybe power it up and then try it out before doing that unlock.
Know what matchups it costs if you don't have Shadow Ball?
Yeah, it's the mirror, Hitmonchan, and Toxicroak no shields. Those are the three.
I feel like Toxicroak no shields is potentially a pretty important one to have, though, because Toxicroak seems like it's going to be the fighting type to use. Like, it seems like if you're running one fighting type, it's going to be Toxicroak, and if you're running more than one fighting type, it's going to be Toxicroak plus something else. So I feel like sacrificing a Toxicroak matchup is not ideal. But obviously, if you're low on rare candy, then that might be the risk you have to take.
And it might change how you play too, kind of like someone who maybe opted to run only Heavy Slam on Bronzong and Kingdom. Maybe you just never let Spiritomb get in that situation where it's shields down and but it's Toxicroak and that third matchup.
That's a good point. It limits your flexibility, but if you know that's a weakness, that's something you can play around.
Right.
Like, for example, in Kingdom, the first Lapras I had really bad IVs, such that I found that Altaria hit a Dragon Breath breakpoint to the point that I wouldn't be able to win the lead scenario. So I just never led my Lapras. So there's definitely ways that you can play around that. Okay, and then what do you guys think of the 3 dark poisons? What are your guys' thoughts on those?
So yeah, I like Drapion a lot. I like the ability to Aqua Tails, and I find it's very useful on the switch in against user because I find often people struggle with switching along the how long of duration confusion is. So you're able to generate a lot of energy with Infestation, Aqua Tail.
Okay, so you're running Infestation. That seems like, in my opinion, that seems like the only real option to run for the fast move. So I thought it was kind of interesting when Game Press suggested running Bite, because it just seems like the energy generation paired with the fact that Infestation is super effective against both Psychic and Dark makes it seem like that would be the move to pick, in my opinion.
A lot of people catch me off guard with Bite as well, though. So
Yeah, that was something that came up in the Twitch chat, was about bite. Personally, I think the consensus among us is bite as probably the inferior move, not just on Drapion, but on Alolan Raticate and several others. That being said, how would you adjust your strategy if you saw someone else using bite?
I mean, you have to be more careful with your psychic types, but at the same time, it means you have an advantage if dark type against whatever's running bite, because bite is resisted by dark types, and it's such slow energy generation that I'm assuming that in most cases, bite is going to lose you a matchup against pretty much any other dark type.
Yeah,
I've summed it out. That's pretty
basically,
much the case.
look. Yeah,
no, I
look at
agree with
that
that.
animation is huge, and be ready for it.
I mean, do you guys think there's any like merit to running bite for that harder hit against psychic types? It just seems like you're turning mons that have more of a generalist approach into more of specialists.
I'd personally go with um, Bite for Skunk Tank, but not Drapion, because Infestation, if you don't use it, you actually generate energy a lot slower, and that kind of loses the point of Drapion, where it's supposed to be either a shield baiter or something to apply a lot of pressure to the opponent. And if you can't fire off Aqua Tail or Crunch quick enough, then you lose that matchup. Well, not lose it, but you do a little worse than expected.
But you think bite is good on skunk tank, you were saying? Why is that?
Just because Skunk Tank with its Crunch and Flamethrower in most cases, well, I mean, most of them that I've went up against, they know it's a poison jab, so they'd bring in either a fighting type or Bronzong to try and actually um, like tank those quick moves because they can, well, the health bulk wise can afford it. But if you run Bite, you only lose out on a bit of energy generation, and you can actually deal super effective damage back in the case of Bronzong, or slightly quicker damage with Bite to the fighting types even if it is resisted. I think it's a 1 turn difference.
If we're going to be
Yeah,
talking about dark fast moves on the dark poison, something that I've been having a lot of fun with is Snarl Alolan Muck with the debuff move, Acid Spray. It's just not a lot of people run it. You usually don't know how to expect it, but I kind of wanted just a blunt instrument against the Psychics. And then against the other darks, you're really not going to do too well. But if you can hit him with an acid spray and then bring in Toxicroak real quick, you can effectively neutralize them, especially if they're slow on the switch out.
So you're turning it into basically just a psychic type counter, and then
Yeah,
using acid spray as like a just a debuff for its bad matchups.
pretty much. Yeah. And then even its bad matchups, if you hit it with an acid spray and then that second, if you hit it with Dark Pulse afterwards and they don't shield that, it's most likely going to take them out. But again, that's only with like a little bit of an energy advantage. You're not going to do too well against other dark types.
Have you tried it with poison jab and acid spray?
I did. It's just that I wasn't doing. As a dark type, I just didn't feel like I was doing as well against the psychic types as I wanted to be. If that makes sense, because they know that a Snarl just deals a lot of unblockable damage, and especially after you hit him with the acid spray, it starts chunking significant like portions of their health with each one. I just didn't like it with poison jab as much.
Interesting. Has anyone else played around with acid spray Alolan Muck?
I haven't, but as I understand it, one of the big appeals of Alolan Muck, which by the way isn't in the infographic on our stream, just because it matches it up in a very strange way with a lot of other things. It doesn't fit in nicely with the graphic, but it's still listed as misfits. But one of the big appeals, it has a inverse relationship with Umbreon and Alolan Raticate, as the other Poison Darks do. So Alolan Muck effectively counters most Dark types that are available, and it still edges out wins against Psychics. So you either choose to be a jack of all trades, or you beat Psychics better, and it just depends on your team composition, which one you prefer.
And the upside about
What?
Snarl is you can usually chew through the psychic types
What?
with just an acid spray, and then it lets you sink an acid spray into the next opponent, which the Sims, they only account for that one battle in front of you. Whereas Muck, if he beats the battle in front of him, can usually land an acid spray into the next opponent, and that makes the rest of your game a lot easier. I mean, again, it's not a guaranteed win. It's just something that I've found useful.
Right, but do you think acid spray is like a consistently effective option, or is it a little gimmicky where you catch them the first time with an acid spray, and then game 2 and game 3 of the matchup, it doesn't work as well?
Even if they're expecting it, regardless of whether they shield or don't shield, you still get the debuff. It's 100% chance, and it's not one stage, it's two. The debuff is extremely significant. So while you might not be drawing shields with it in the later games, you're still going to be, as long as you land the acid spray, you're doing all right. Granted that you have something else in the back that is able to supply enough damage, like Shiftry or Toxicroak.
As one of the random people who spar him, I can definitely say that Acid Spray has won him a lot of games that if he didn't have it, he definitely would have lost. And just the mere fact that he can get off Acid Spray on 2 or even 3 of your lineup is going to effectively hamper your ability to win quite significantly.
Right, because acid spray is going to basically flip any mirror or close matchup.
Right.
Because the debuff is so big. Kieng, did you have any experience with acid spray Alolan Muck?
I haven't acid spray Alolan Muck. I haven't used it too often, but I've faced them times, and I haven't had too much issue with it. I guess one comment on the Alolan Muck versus Psychic type. I find like this is that I'd find it not very often that at least my experience when I'm battling people that obviously you catch them on if you both switch, and then that's a completely different story. But I'll actually use it as a lead, mid game or lead. I'm just curious on which one you use it as.
Yeah, I use it more as a mid game, or especially as a lead, because even if I lead a Toxicroak, I can hit it. I'll usually just stay in there, shield a Mud Bomb, hit it with an Acid Spray, and then switch in something that hits Toxicroak so hard that one Confusion does already a significant amount of damage, but with a debuff Toxicroak, you've essentially rendered the thing useless. It's just its worst matchups is against another Dark type Pokemon, where you're forced to swap in Toxicroak, or even like your Xatu or something else, whatever you else have you back. But I like to use it beginning a game, and if it has an unfavorable matchup, use the Acid Spray and switch it out. But the key that I've found to it is using Snarl and not Poison Jab, which really helps like solidify it as like a Dark type, which is kind of something I felt was missing from my team. But it has like a very it's like a support Pokemon. It doesn't do well at the end of the game without something to clean up behind it. Unless you're against a Psychic type 1-on-1, you can hit it with a Dark Pulse.
Okay, and then kind of explaining out in terms of dark types in general. What dark types are you guys finding to work the best? Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
I can hear you, yeah.
Yeah.
I know King said he liked Drapion. I like
Yeah.
Drapion.
Okay, but
Personally-
outside of Drapion, what else do you like?
I like Alolan Raticate as well. A matchup with Toon, which I imagine is going to be a somewhat popular pick for those that can afford to power it up in one.
Right, because it triple resists Ghost Man, so it completely walls it.
Yeah, the only issue is that if you're running quick attack, you're you could farm energy, but it would be an extremely long. Because it also double resists you with its double or
With his
single? I
ghost
can't remember.
typing.
Yeah,
Single or double?
yeah, double resist. It's a double resist.
It's double resist, so it'd be because I think I used it one time. I'm okay. This is great. I'm gonna farm some energy. And I'm like, oh, this is taking way too long, and I'm eating way too many charge moves, even if they're triple resisted. So you're kind of forced to maybe with a little bit more practice, I could strategically farm the energy better. At what point do I need to use a Hyper Fang or a Crunch to correctly so I can farm some energy? But I like that the Hyper Fang can hit for neutral damage. It's a lot of the meta.
And it hits hard, too.
Yeah, you hit a Toxicroak with Hyper Fang, it's
So I mean, I've in practice matches, I've farmed Spiritomb with Eradicate, and I've come out with pretty much 2 Hyper Fangs banked. Eradicate's almost, fainted at that point because I'm just taking all the charge attacks, but it's still like a huge, be able to. Against whatever's coming in next, usually beta shield, and then the second one hit.
I think the biggest risk with doing that is if you're farming, and then Spiritomb gets off a buff. I think that's probably the risky play there.
Definitely.
But so it's finding that margin of how far you can extend it, but not risking it too much. Especially because, like, if your Eradicate ends up too low on health, then a counter from a Toxicroak, like 1 to 2 counters, might just wipe it out.
Yeah, I was actually curious on whether or not it's one of those situations where even if you're at full switching clock will expire, and then you have to really monitor that. Someone just comes in with Toxicroak, hits you with 2 counters, and you just and you're. So I'm just curious. I actually would gonna look up those numbers later tonight to see if that's actually the case.
And I've liked Shift 3 as well for his electrical resistance against Alolan Raichu. It's just that you definitely sacrifice the Xatu matchup because you're weak to flying type damage.
Right, and Shift 3 loses to the dark poisons as well.
Right. Yeah, anything that resists Razor Leaf is pretty much going to win, but anything that doesn't, you're going to usually win the battle or take out most of its health. I mean, its matches are pretty much set in stone because you don't have a lot of energy gain, but For people who want to just get by on a cheap budget this cup, I'd certainly look at Shiftry.
Yeah, because it doesn't really need a second move.
Right.
You can run it with just Razor Leaf and Leaf Blade. And the thing is that most of its winning matchups, it wins with just Razor Leaf.
Yeah.
Which means I think the only matchup that it actually needs Leaf Blade for to win is the Bronzong matchup. But besides that, all of its one shield matchups that it wins, it just Razor Leafs them down and then has a charge move ready for the next. And then if you do add a second move, it's an interesting choice because you either have a Leaf Tornado for the potential debuff, which has some uses, but Foul Play seems a little better because if you're able to get that in on a Zatu, then that one-shots it.
Despite it being resisted, Leaf Blade will actually take out about 40% of Zatu's health. It does a lot more than you'd expect for being resisted.
That's interesting. I mean, I guess it makes sense because Shiftry's on the glassier side, so its moves are going to hit hard regardless. But yeah, back to, I think Alolan Raticate's pretty interesting because it has generally good matchups against the rest of the dark types, while also beating most of the psychic types. So it's another one of those mons similar to Toxicroak that's able to more or less beat its own typing as well as one other typing. And do you guys so in my opinion it seems like Alolan Raticate is generally better than Umbreon. Do you guys see any cases where Umbreon would be better? Or do you guys agree that Alolan Raticate is generally the superior option?
I want to hear King's opinion.
Yeah, I prefer Alolan Raticate way more than Umbreon, but I imagine that because it's this more flexible Pokemon, it also is a trade-off, the logical trade-off that it's not as against the type it's meant to beat the most, which is its psychic users. Actually, I've read I'm just of the moves that you're using, but like I imagine against, for example, against
Also
Bronzong.
Also Umbreon's bulk plus its only single weakness to fighting means it has a little bit better of a chance against them even if it loses. So if say you farmed up energy with Umbreon, but you have low HP, maybe not like, we're not talking about like 15 HP, but if you have like on the low side of HP with Eradicate, you're just going to go down in like what, 2 counters with Toxicroak? Versus Umbreon, at least you have time to get in maybe those two charge moves or whatever you have charged up.
Yeah. So I find the inverse of the moves, like having fast move and then normal charge move, it at least allows it to do a little bit better against. Well, I'm presuming that it's winning matchups against the entire psychic meta. I might be wrong on Bronzong. Is a harder counter, so it depends on how you want to play.
I mean, so AJ, what you were saying is true, but I think that's kind of a blessing and a curse because at the same time, the fact that Alolan Raticate dies faster means that it can't be farmed as much. Whereas Umbreon's single weakness and tankiness means that it can get farmed a lot more by fighting types.
Yeah, I just ran the sims on that actually, and Alolan Raticate dives to 10 counters. I was using Toxicroak as the opponent example, versus Umbreon dies at 18 counters. And in that time, Toxicroak can actually charge up 2 Mud Bombs against Raticate and not use them, or nearly 4 against Umbreon, but the energy actually caps out. So it really depends
Yeah,
on how
so
you want to farm.
you can't use them in the same way, of course. But as an example, I've been on the receiving end of an Umbreon, and what he would do is, he'd charge up in a bad matchup. He'd maybe charge up a little bit and then switch it out. And Umbreon can do that while Raticate, for example, can't. So you have to use them differently. Um,
Right, that's fair.
if if you're with Umbreon, say you're leading Umbreon and Toxicroak, and you're up against Toxicroak, well, you're gonna switch out unless you don't mind losing the Umbreon. But at least you can farm before you switch out. So that's something to consider. But you're right that if you just stay in that position or you switch in an Umbreon, well, then he's gonna be able to get a lot of farming in because of its high bulk.
Well, I was thinking more like the scenario where they switch to a psychic type, you bring an Umbreon, you kill it, but you're still switch locked.
Right.
But you do make a good point about like the lead scenario because with Umbreon you are able to leave it in, get some energy, and like King was saying, count their counters and then swap out to Zatu right before a Mud Bomb, for example.
Yeah. And he can tank a Mud Bomb, so maybe you could do two, for example.
Right. King, what were you gonna say?
Oh, no, I was just agreeing with the points, but yeah, I think different uses for sure. One comfortable than the other. So
But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that appeals to me about Eradicate is that Alolan Muck and Shiftry are the only dark types that can beat it in like a even 0-0 scenario. So that's pretty good coverage against its own type. And then, do you guys have anything else you want to add about dark types, or anything from the Twitch chat?
I just wanted to make one correction about the Spiritomb. It's actually Hitmonchan and Toxicroak that the Sucker Punch Shield Bait is dependent for, not Poliwrath. So that's even bigger. So you really want Feint Attack to where you don't have to Shield Bait with Sucker Punch.
I have a question for you around Drapion and Aquatail Crunch, but some people have suggested to me to run Aquatail Sludge Bomb. I'm not sure what the merits of that from your guys.
Well, I think when you're running Sludge Bomb, you're losing. I mean, then you're not running any Dark type moves. So I think you're losing a little coverage against Psychic types. But Sludge Bomb, when it is neutral, will hit harder than Aquatail. So it gives you a little bit more of a late game punch.
But do you really need more neutral damage than Aquatail though? I mean, like with the premier Pokemon being Toxicroak and the Dark Poisons, that's what you'd use Aquatail for. What does Sludge Bomb? What would Sludge Bomb give you though? Would it give you a little
Poliwrath?
Eradicate or Umbreon?
I guess it lets you to hit Poliwrath hard. If you were versus like Poliwrath right now, you get completely.
Oh, right.
It's like the only.
That's
the only
true.
case because I've been hit by a Sludge Bomb. I'm like, okay, either they're gonna hit me with a Sludge Bomb. I should have shielded that. Please know that it's coming.
I mean,
That's like
it would hit Umbreon and Alolan Eradicate harder. I'm just not sure if it's enough to flip the matchup. but it could be a scenario where, with like a little bit of an energy advantage, you might be able to win those where you wouldn't without it. I'm not sure.
Let's see here.
It does.
It-
Go ahead.
It wins against Umbreon with shields with Sludge Bomb, assuming it can bait an Aqua Tail.
It now.
Actually, might.
Go ahead.
And it wins without the bait, actually, in the 1 shield matchup and ties 2 shields. Go
That
for
was
it.
against Umbreon?
Yeah, that was against Umbreon. Did you do Eradicate?
I did Zatu because I know that like Crunch like one shot Zatu, so I was checking that and it ties Zatu now in no shields without Crunch.
Stations too. KO.
It just seems generally worse to me.
I like my dark types to have some sort of dark function.
I agree.
Some of your thoughts. I was actually going to change it unless you guys were going to present some really convincing points. But
No, I mean, it seems like there's like a few little niche uses where it might be better, but it seems like in general across the board, Aquatail Crunch seems like the better moveset.
Yeah, it also it can tie even Zatu in 1 shield if it doesn't bait properly. So that's even worse because now it's like potentially tying Zatu in both key shield scenarios.
Yeah, that's one you want to be winning because Zatu seems like it's going to be pretty popular.
I did have a question that came up. Is Spiritomb, and you guys might have covered it. Spiritomb with only 1 charge move. If it was Ominous Wind, would you be missing out on a lot just by not having Shadow Ball?
Yeah, so I can repeat that. I briefly covered that, but I can repeat that again. So without Shadow Ball, you can still win Toxicroak and Alolan Raichu 1 shield, which is huge. But it's definitely worth adding if you can for the Mirror, Hitmonchan. That's both 0 and 1 shields. Although the 1 shield is a tie with the Shadow Ball. And then Toxicroak no shields is another big one for Shadow Ball. But you can definitely play around it. Like we've kind of touched on that a little bit. If you kind of protect or save a shield for Spiritomb, then you sort of, keep it in its best shield scenarios with only using Ominous.
Gotcha.
Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to cover, unless there were any other comments about dark types, was just general roster composition, because it seems like there's a few different kind of popular team comps flying around. There's like the balance 2-2-2, where you have 2 fightings, 2 darks, and 2 psychics, and then there seem to be a few other team comps where you're running just 1 fighting with either 3 darks or 3 psychics. So those of you that have kind of gotten in more practice with a full team of 6, what are your guys' thoughts on the different team composition options in terms of just kind of number of dark psychics and fighting types?
I currently I'm running 2 psychic, 2 dark. But I do find most of the time when I'm building my team of 3 that I prefer Toxtro, whatever other fighting Pokemon that I'm using. and then it ends up second fighting Pokemon ends up having very low percentage usage in my lineups or in my battles that I'm practicing with. So I certainly could see a lot of merits in bringing an additional dark or bringing an additional good one.
Mason, what do you think?
I've been running just Toxicroak for my fighter, and then I often find that I don't miss him too much. I've run a little bit of 2-2-2, but I just don't bring Lucario as much, because most of the things that are gunning for Toxicroak at the end of a game are also gunning for Lucario, or they're going to get Lucario as well. The things that I honestly I like to I'm flip-flopping back and forth between doubling up between Psychic and Dark. And then I've seen several convincing arguments that if you're going to run triple Dark types, that Spiritomb would be an excellent addition to that. And then I like the Psychic types just for their sheer versatility. Like Alolan Raichu is just a surprise, little fun Pokemon.
So when you're running, let's say you're running triple psychic, which 3 are you using?
Usually Xatu, and then a confusion user, which would either be Claydol or Bronzong, and then Alolan Raichu.
Okay, and then if you're running a triple dark, then which 2 are you running? I'm assuming
If I'm
Xatu
running-
and then what?
If I'm running triple
Which-
Dark, it'll usually be a Dark Poison, either Drapion or Muck with the Snarl, and then as the second one, it'll be usually Shiftry or Alolan Raticate. And then sometimes I'll even run double Dark Poison, but it just makes me lean on Toxicroak heavier, so I tend to lean more towards Shiftry as my second Dark type.
Okay, and if you're running triple dark types, then which 3 darks and which 2 poisons are you usually going with?
If I'm running triple Dark, it's usually Snarl, Amok, Drapion, and Shiftry, and the 2 Psychic types that I run with it are Xatu and usually confusion user, be it Bronzong or Claydol.
Okay. So you're not running a little.
I'm not using too much Alolan Raichu myself. I'm trying to see what I can do without it first. It's just I've steered away from it, but I like Blaziken and Kingdom Cup. I feel that I'll eventually come back to it.
Why are you steering away from it? Just to try without it, or is there a reason that?
To try without it, but I feel that it's going to be so common because it is so accessible and powerful that I'd rather bring a counter to it than bring it itself, which there's probably some flaws in that logic itself, but that's just kind of the route that I'm going right now.
And King, how about you?
I'm actually in the mindset that Mason has in his current mindset, not his future or previous one. In terms of, I expect Alolan Raichu to be very common. I expect people to run it as a lead very often. I'm working more towards countering it than necessarily bringing an Alolan Raichu.
What about Alolan Raticate, though? Because he was saying he wasn't using Alolan Raticate much. So I was also wondering about that.
Yeah, I find, and maybe this is more psychological gameplay, when I do show that I have Alolan Raticate in my team, very aggressive in bringing, leading with their fighting Pokemon or are bringing their fighting Pokemon. So could be more mind games than if I don't use it. Do you see the double weakness and have a lot of desire to take it out with their fighting Pokemon? So baiting in the right scenario could be useful as well.
And you said you're mostly running a 2-2-2, but have you tried any lineups with like triple dark or triple psychic?
I have not tried a lineup with triple dark or triple psychic, but I think there's a lot of merit in that idea, and something that actually I was this discussion that I'm going to probably try tomorrow in preparation for my cup on Sunday to see how effective it is.
Yeah, and I
It
think
mostly just used-
one thing that people on the PvP international server were discussing is the merit of running Spiritomb in the triple dark, because if you're running triple dark, it leaves you generally open to fighting types, but because of Spiritomb's ghost typing, it has better matchups against fighting types than the other darks. So it's like you're running triple dark, but since Spiritomb is kind of a pseudo dark, it plays a little differently and means that you're not quite as weak against fighting types.
and oftentimes I do run in my lineup of three. I do end up running two darks, and one of the darks being Spiritomb. Fighting. So, uh,
Yeah,
playing.
for
Not
what it's worth,
now.
what I've seen a lot in scrims
Okay.
and looking at the videos,
Okay.
almost everyone will run one psychic, one dark, one fighting. The order varies a little bit, and then the coverage changes depending on what you pick specifically. But almost always, it'll be one psychic, one dark, and then one fighting. So doubling up on one category, played correctly, could definitely swing a match, I think.
Right, especially if you're running, if one of those three is a mon that has pretty good coverage against two types, like something like Toxicroak that beats pretty much all the darks and all the fightings, or Alolan Raticate that can beat psychics and most of the darks. Something like that, I think, can help if you're doubling up on one category also.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree with that. I think so. I've run Alolan Raticate and Tox some, and I've definitely tried different variations of doubling up on all three types actually. Doubling up on psychics and darks tends to go a little better because usually when I double up on fighting, I was trying Lucario, and that just sort of leaves me open to fighting types. But I have tried the three dark lineup with Spiritomb. I do really like it. The good thing about Spiritomb is, like you kind of mentioned, it gives you just one more plus matchup against Toxicroak. So it gives you some flexibility if you want to run a Raichu, which trades more with Toxicroak. You can still do that if you run Spiritomb in the 3D lineup. And yeah, I've liked it so far.
Do you think you can make a good 3D lineup that had, say, a Alolan Raticate with Shift Tree and a Dark Poison, or do you think that's not going to work as well as either running Spiritomb or like two Dark Poisons in your triple dark?
I think you could make that work. You definitely shouldn't bring Alolan Raichu at that point, or at least I wouldn't, because that leaves you really open to Toxicroak. Because then you're basically relying on whatever confusion user you have, or the CMP, one shield tie with a Raichu or the mirror. So I would say, like, if you don't run Spirit, then you probably have to get away from Alolan Raichu and try some combination of like Xatu Bronzong or Xatu Claydol.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think just before we wrap up, if anyone wanted to share maybe their favorite team of 6 they've used so far.
Mason, I think you have the most practice of all of us.
I'm sorry, man. I'm like shoveling dinner into my mouth.
Oh,
Favorite teams of 6. Toxicroak's on there for sure. Strongly followed by Zatu and Drapion. And then I just in the Nightmare Cup, I find that no matter what you run, you tend to run into something where you'll at least be weak. Like 2 of your Pokemon will be weak to something. So like if I were to run like Toxicroak and Shiftry together, I'll be weak to Zatu and stuff like that. So I use that core a lot, and then I try to build around it pretty much to support that. So Tox, Drapion, Zatu, and then mostly supportive roles like Claydol for taking out Toxicroak and Alolan Raichu, which would both give that lineup trouble. Alolan Muck because Acid Spray is fun. And it's usually usually Shiftry for the last slot, just for extra support against Alolan Raichu.
Yeah, so right now my team of 6 that I've been running, and I think I've done an amount of Nightmare Cup battles at this point in time. I think I have like probably like 150 wins since it dropped. But I've been running I do a very early cup, like my cup is on Sunday, just so that people can get a point of view of what the meta for Nightmare. So at the sacrifice of my own prep, and then but typically, Toxicroak, Poliwrath, Zatu, you could replace it with Bronzong, and then Drapion and I had a lone Raticate at one point in time, but I've been running Spiritomb more when I run 2 Darks and a Fighting in my lineup ability.
Right, and I think because you're running with 2 fighters, you can go with Spiritomb. Because Spiritomb does lose to the dark types, but you have the double fighting to help cover that. But I think Spiritomb would be a little iffier if you were running only 1 fighting type and not another dark, or not triple dark.
Yeah. I'd be more hesitant to run triple psychic than I should say. I'd be more prone to running triple dark than triple psychic, based off the lineups that I've been using.
Do you think we've convinced you to maybe run triple dark, or do you think you'll stick with the 2-2-2?
I'm gonna
that's what
try
you're familiar
triple dark. I'm gonna try a triple dark. See how my matchups play out, and when I live stream later tonight, and see how it goes. Because I do find that I don't use Poliwrath that often. I like Poliwrath in some matchups, and also I also like that it hit as hard against these confusion users.
Right. I just my biggest reservation with Poliwrath is all the Shiftry and Alolan Raichu flying around.
Yeah, I find that I can never run Zatu and Poliwrath because obviously if I run into a Alolan Raichu, then I'm pretty screwed at that point in time. Yeah, so but to be honest, in my practice matchups, because I probably practice against between 10 and 12 people. Not that many people have at least brought in Shiftry against me.
Interesting.
And I practice with a pretty group of individuals, but no one's brought in Shiftry quite yet. But I'm sure it's coming at some point in time, and then Poliwrath will obviously quite a bit.
And you'll have to let us know how you like Bronzong.
Yeah, I have played with on it, but maybe I need to give it a little bit more of a shot.
Yeah, I mean the big thing I haven't done really much Nightmare practice yet, but I know I use Bronzong in Kingdom, and when I first used it, I didn't really like it. It felt really clunky, and I just wasn't that good with it. And it took me a lot of practice to really get the hang of it.
No, certainly. Need more strategic gameplay. I just like Hypno so much because it saved me in so many matches where I thought I was losing, then I end up winning the match with the Focus Blast. So with like minimal HP left,
That makes
just
sense,
like
but I think you'll have a similar effect with like a Flash Cannon,
Flash
for
Cannon.
example.
Yeah, and that's very fair.
All right, so does anyone have any last thoughts before we wrap up the stream?
Don't use Wobbuffet.
Make sure to
Or
include
it looks like
cameras on your
Grumpig as
team.
well. Yeah, Grumpig as well as
AJ, but what about Murkrow?
Well, you got to watch out for Heracross. Did we even mention Heracross
Yeah, we
in
talked
our
about it.
fighting?
We
Yeah,
did
we did.
talk about
Yeah.
it a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, Heracross is interesting, and then Murkrow's got some interesting stuff. But I just don't think, those 6 slots are really precious. You don't want to blow them on a crow that can't even do its primary job all the time.
Yeah,
I agree.
Whenever I fought Murkrow, doesn't just do it.
Gives you a good laugh.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
does
I was just
Wobbuffet,
really
though.
surprised. I was just really surprised that Game Press highlighted Murkrow as much as they did, because it just doesn't seem like it's up to par with some of these other options. All right, well, Kieng, thanks for joining us.
I know. Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed this. I learned a lot as well. So a lot of interesting points for me to ponder on as well. So this has been really great. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And good luck this weekend.
Thank you.